Well, good afternoon, everybody. Uh, I'd like to warmly welcome everyone since we're on the cold prairies. Um, I'm Deirdre Chisholm. I'm at the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba. And if you've just dialed in, we're at the Lunch and Look for A Prairie Vernacular. Today I'm joined by the co-curators, Jen McRorie from Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery, and Joanne Marion, who originally is from the Esplanade Heritage Center, Arts and Heritage Center, rather. I think she's recently retired, but she can tell us that further. I think these two curators have collaborated for a long time, and I'm very, very pleased that they're joining us from these distant locations today to talk a little bit about the genesis of A Prairie Vernacular, tell us their curatorial secrets, and tell us about some good stories that you came upon throughout this process. Just a little note to people who are tuning in. You're welcome to ask questions in the chat box of Facebook, and with the curators on hand, we'll try to answer your burning questions. Again, there's going to be introductions, and then we'll have an opportunity to be taken through images from the exhibition, and then we're going to premiere again a short intro video of the works as they look in the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba. And one more note that I'd like to thank the dock here in Brandon for their assistance with the delivery and preparation of our delicious lunches. So again, we're going to make this a real bona fide feast, and I'm going to get into the introductions. Again, Jennifer McRorie is the curatorial director at the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery in Moose Jaw, of course, since 2015. She's been active for more than 20 years in Saskatchewan arts community as an arts administrator, a curator, arts writer, visual artist, and she served in many roles in various arts organizations and galleries, including the Saskatchewan Arts Board, the Organization of Saskatchewan Arts Councils, Carfax, Saskatchewan, Mackenzie Art Gallery, the Dunlop Art Gallery, the Elsie Shirley Gallery, and the University of Lethbridge Art Gallery, where she started out as a curatorial intern. She holds a Master's of Fine Art with distinction from the University of Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand, and a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Regina. And then Joanne Marion was the curator director of exhibitions and collections at the Esplanade Arts and Heritage Center in Medicine Hat, Alberta, for the past 3 years. And then prior to that, she was curator director of the Esplanade Art Gallery for 17 years. She has curated many solo, group, and touring exhibitions and produced numerous exhibition catalogs, as well as contributed texts for collaborative curatorial and publication projects. She received her Bachelor of Fine Arts from Queen's University in Ontario and a Master's of Fine Arts from the University of Guelph. Welcome, welcome to the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba. I am going to turn it over to Jen to have some introductions.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's so nice to get a glimpse of the exhibition in your space. It looks fantastic. The Prairie Vernacular is started way back in, I believe it was 2016 when Joanne and I started talking about it, and so it's great to see it come to fruition and to be able to see it in the different venues as it tours the country.
That's wonderful. It's my pleasure to have this connection. And then I was going to just ask Joanne to have if you could say a few words about your role and I think your regular collaborators. Yeah, I think the truth is starting to leak out. I think you've been long time collaborators, you know.
Yes, I've often thought that I should just move to Moose Jaw, get it over with, and move to Moose Jaw. But I guess we're like 5 hours drive away. But somehow there seems to be a wonderful kind of shared spirit with the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery. Jennifer's predecessor, Heather Smith, and I collaborated on some projects, well, quite a few projects over the decades. And I was just so pleased when Jen reached out to me on this particular project, and it was 2016, actually, when we first started talking about it. And Jen started putting together the Canadian Heritage application, which was the major support for the project. And I was immediately intrigued. It's a fabulous idea. And it was Jen's idea. And so, yeah, we just started working together in a very collaborative and really fun way. Like the research was really, really fun. And it was great to be able to travel around the prairies and go to institutions that I hadn't had a chance to visit before, look at numerous collections, and just it's so inspiring to have a wonderful collaborator.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's been a great experience collaborating with Joanne for sure on this project. And I guess I should say that the idea came from I actually had just started with the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery in 2015 and was getting acquainted with the collection here, and noticed that we had a really actually a large collection of folk art. And so I started to research a little bit, and that's when I discovered there was a really interesting connection between contemporary artists and folk artists, and like artists like Vic Sikansky and Joe Fafard, David Thalberger and Russ Uricity in Saskatchewan. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to do an exhibition about the connections between folk art and looking at the influences maybe of folk art in contemporary work? And then contacted Joanne and said, maybe we should do this, look at the prevalence of folk art on the prairies, and then connections of that within contemporary work. And so it became this massive project that we tried to whittle down. And the show in Moose Jaw, I think, had the largest number of pieces. We had 200 artworks, and that was the edited version. You know, so like Joanne said, the research was a lot of fun. Going to various institutions, looking at their collections, meeting with private collectors that were really great in guiding us towards different artists to look at. And yeah, connecting with and that includes artists like Vic Sikansky and Joe Fafard and David Thalberger, which we've borrowed from their collections as well. So yeah,
that's fantastic. Well, we have a little bit of a treat for you. We're going to play sort of the first intro video that we've prepared that shows what the current touring exhibition looks like. So, and this is also to assist our audience with having an opportunity to see what the context or what the exhibition looks like here in Brandon. And you know, again, it's my delight to introduce this the intro video.
Welcome to the AGSM's Art Connects video series for A Prairie Vernacular, a new art exhibition on at the AGSM from January 14th to March 13th, 2021. A Prairie Vernacular presents a stunning array of over 100 historic and contemporary artworks borrowed from public and private collections throughout Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba. A Prairie Vernacular was curated by Jennifer McRorie and Joanne Marion, with writings contributed by Indigenous art historian and curator Dr. Carmen Robertson in her essay, An Indigenous Prairie Aesthetic. The artworks reveal a shared interest in prairie culture and environment, and as viewers we gain insight into the artist's prairie experience, deepening our own understanding of prairie identity. In this video, we will introduce you to the exhibition and share the curator's vision with you. We will begin to explore the roots of folk and funk in Saskatchewan and the connections between prairie artists that form the foundation of this exhibition. The exhibition considers the relationship of folk art to contemporary art produced in the prairie provinces. The genre of vernacular art is largely defined as being made by individuals untrained in the visual arts, who may not even identify themselves as artists. Artists represented in the exhibition include historic and contemporary untrained or self-taught artists, as well as academically trained artists whose works speak to the vernacular, the locality, and the history of the prairies. At times, the artists adopt the materials, methods, and/or motivations of a folk aesthetic and speak to shared contexts and subject matter, reflecting on memories and histories of life on the prairies. The curator saw several major themes emerging throughout the huge volume of work. Themes include humor and playfulness, fantasy and the surreal, politics and religion, the everyday, memory and memoria, and the Prairie Gothic. Both historical and contemporary prairie vernacular works share these themes, creating a dialogue that extends through time and across all three prairie provinces. The term folk art is challenging to define and problematic at times, serving to other the artists being referred to, positioning them outside of the mainstream art world. Cognizant of this, the curators decided to focus on the artists and their art, instead of labeling them into categories. The presentation of the exhibition is designed through several main themes, as well as real and perceived relationships, exhibiting historic and contemporary works side by side. The curators chose to refer to the work of untrained artists as vernacular art. They feel the term vernacular is more inclusive than other terms. The layout allows the works to dialogue or speak to one another, weaving overarching, complex narratives of prairie sensibilities and experience. It encourages audiences to draw connections between the work of these historic and contemporary artists, to consider the prevalence of vernacular art on the prairies, and the impact it has had on our art, collective culture, and identity as prairie people. Looking at the roots of folk and funk in Saskatchewan helps us to understand how the exhibition developed and the rich relationships between trained and untrained artists. There is a long and robust history with vernacular art in Saskatchewan, where this genre of art is extremely prevalent. It has had support from curators, contemporary artists, art dealers, collectors, and the general public. According to Nancy Tousley, Saskatchewan's arts community has the most complex interactions between trained and untrained artists who accepted the former as colleagues. It is this connection between trained and untrained artists in Saskatchewan and their artistic exchange that became a compelling point of curatorial inquiry for the exhibition, A Prairie Vernacular. In the 1970s, a younger generation of artists emerged in Saskatchewan who wanted to make work that was situated in the prairies, which spoke to the places and the experiences that they knew. Saskatchewan artists Victor Sikansky, David Thauberger, and Joe Fafard were inspired by the West Coast funk aesthetic of California ceramics, which engaged in humor and surrealism to focus on everyday subjects, popular culture, and personal narrative. This became a catalyst for a new prairie movement. During their time in California, the artists found support for their interest in vernacular art sources. They were given the confidence to see their own culture and historical circumstances, the prairie experience, as equal to any other for cultural investigation. The Regina artists recognized that their artwork and motivations had a natural affinity with that of vernacular artists. Both shared a belief in the values of prairie experience and history. Vernacular artists provided the Regina artists with another model or context to respond to their own regional experience within mainstream contemporary art. Thalberger was first introduced to the work of Molly Lenhart and Laura Harness while adjudicating artwork in rural Saskatchewan at Watrous. Thalberger, Sikansky, and Fafard began to form relationships with many of Saskatchewan's now recognized folk artists, supporting their practices by collecting their works, curating work into exhibitions, as well as collaborating with them. Joe Fafard created sculptures of Harvey McInnes, William McCarger, and Jan Wyers, artists with whom he was connected with and admired. The appreciation of this artistic exchange and support is evident in the portraits by Molly Lenhart of Thalberger, Sikansky, and the Fafard family. Many of Thalberger's compositional strategies, such as presenting flattened, frontal perspectives that are pushed into the foreground, give nods to Molly Lenhart's frontal views of subjects and shallow pictorial space, as well as William McCarger's flattened and simplified paintings of architectural structures. An exciting new ceramic movement was born in Regina, driven by experimentation, play, humor, and personal narrative. Learn more about the other themes in the exhibition in the rest of the AGSM Art Connects video series, which brings you up close and personal to works of art as you meet artists from the prairies.
Welcome back.
Oh, that was great.
Yeah.
You're-
So wonderful to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it starts to relax me with that jazz sound. So I almost forget where I am, but that's perfect. So, but I know that that you've been able to go into collections fairly deeply, and I just wondered if you could share with us some of the surprising aspects of your research that the public may not have been aware of, or some things that were unique to this presentation.
Did you want me to start, Joanne, or?
If you want to, I've got something in mind, but I can wait.
Oh, go ahead. You start.
I think my biggest delight was the work of Percy Two-Gun Plain Woman. And I'd maybe seen one or two things, but hadn't really delved into his career at all. And Percy Two-Gun Plain Woman was Kainai from the Blood Nation near Standoff, Alberta. And a prodigious painter. He started when he was about 50, and this is probably about 50 years ago. And prior to that, he was a rodeo rider and a bronc buster and a cow puncher. And at 50, decided to start painting. And his portraits of Blackfoot people and other kind of prairie notables were famous throughout Alberta and down in Montana. And his work is held in the collections of the Lethbridge Art Gallery and the Galt Museum and the Glenbow and the Esplanade. Some of his work and some of the other Indigenous artists generated a really interesting discussion and thought process around inclusion of Indigenous folk artists and Indigenous contemporary vernacular artists such as Adrian Stimson between Jen and I. And I think that's probably one of the major differences between this exhibition and other exhibitions that have looked at the vernacular, perhaps under the title of folk art or primitive art. And in that undertaking, Dr. Carmen Robertson was absolutely essential in coming to grips with how to understand and how to present the work. So I think that was probably one of the most intriguing elements for me.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was, I think some of the kind of nice surprises were finding connections between artists' work. And some of them, like some of them were actual direct connections, you know, like David Thauberger, speaking to him about his work, he acknowledged that, you know, he was influenced by Molly Lenhart and William McCarger. David Thauberger, it's great to hear him talk about, because his relationship with so many folk artists in Saskatchewan, because he would regularly go out on weekends and go have coffee with them and get to know them, and was collecting their work and curating their work into exhibitions. And collaborating with them as well. So there were some direct connections you could see in his work, but then there was others that Joanne and I sort of started, because as we got, we're doing the research and we started seeing there's similar themes that were popping up, you know, that in terms of like politics and religion, Prairie Gothic, just, you know, kind of commenting on everyday life, that sort of thing. We started intuitively seeing connections. And so like we would see like William McCarger's work is sort of known for having these, what we start calling torpedo clouds. And then I started seeing them in some contemporary artist work, like Richard Grenko, his work. And then, you know, also Chris, sorry, not Chris Finn, from Manitoba. His name has left me.
Lobchuk?
Not Lobchuk. Sorry?
Ivan Iyer?
Oh
no, yeah. He's got the images of the you know, it's sort of a very abstracted train tracks, just like William McCarger, and with the lone cloud as well, sort of torpedo cloud. We saw connections in some of the printmaking that was coming out of Bill Lobchuk's you know, Grand Canadian Western Screen Shop. So
Don Proch.
Don Proch, yeah, that's it, Don Proch, yeah. So it was great to see these connections between various prairie artists.
And you know, I was looking at some of the images last night and noticed that there's that same torpedo cloud in Adrian Simpson's Buffalo Abstract piece as well.
Right.
Yeah,
that's great. Before I go too off track, Jen, did you want to jump in with your presentation as well?
Yeah, I just wondered if I should. So I'll just I'll share some images of the exhibition in Moose Jaw, and then there's just some individual shots of works as well. Waiting for it. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
So this will just scroll through, and again, these are just organized in the different categories as well. So you can see there's a nice connection between David Thauberger's Prairie piece and Wesley Dennis's paintings of the Red Combine. So it was kind of great to make these little discoveries as we were doing the research for the show.
Molly Lenhart.
Yeah. There you can see the torpedo clouds on the right hand there. That's William McCarger's work.
And some of the Regina Funk work on the corner.
Yes, yeah.
And here.
And there you can see Don Proche's print there with the lone cloud.
This was the politics and religion section with an obvious figure there, Rock and Rolloni by Jerry Kaiser. And Joe Ford with Jean Chrétien in the background there.
Mm-hmm.
This is the two video works, Emily Atkins and Heather Benning.
Nice.
And this is the humor and playfulness section. Yeah.
Which is an interesting distinction, actually.
Yeah, it was interesting how it was sort of already presented in the video, but when Joanne and I were doing some of the research, we, as I said, we started seeing these connections between addressing everyday life or addressing memories of a prairie history. Prairie Gothic is another one that we saw in some folk art, like Frank Sikansky's work about the Depression years, and then seeing it in contemporary works like Heather Benning's Dollhouse and Emily Atkins' video as well. Some of the Indigenous Prairie Gothic pieces, and probably even Jude Griebel, I would put him in there as well.
Yeah.
Chris Reed as well. So it was just interesting to basically place some of the historic folk art in dialogue with contemporary work throughout the space.
And some of the pieces could shift between categories as well. Like you could, Jude Griebel's piece that we're looking at now easily could go into the Prairie Gothic as well as humor and playfulness.
Yes, yes, for sure. Yeah.
Both
it was also speaking of humor and playfulness, it was great to have the Manitoba artist there of Jordan Van Sewell, because his work is really connected to the California funk aesthetic, which was predominantly Seed in Regina, but it was great that we found a Manitoba artist that was connected to sort of that history. And I guess Jordan was originally from Moose Jaw, born and raised, and he did come to Regina, I guess, to take some workshops whenever there was a California artist doing any presentations. And so it was great to see that that influence and to be able to include his work, because he's got some great pieces in the exhibition.
And exploring some of the different categories was interesting. Like I mentioned humor and playfulness, and looking into it a bit to discover that humor could include playfulness, but it could also be quite dark. And you see that in works by, say, Diana Thornycroft, where they're definitely humorous, but and maybe a little playful, but they do have a darker edge that that kind of looks at some of the issues that people are facing on the prairies, or maybe the history of the prairies, and can bring out some very dark elements. So things like that, or the difference between memory, which would be personal, and memoria, which might be an artist who's looking back at an experience or an event that they have a knowledge of. Like, say, Henry Beaudry in the signing of the treaty, is it Treaty 6?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, signing Treaty 6, which he wouldn't have been present at, and yet has a personal knowledge of through anecdote and his nation's history.
Yeah. Esther Workoff, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, there was, I mean, we limited ourselves to about 200 works, right, Jen?
Right. Yeah. And there could have been so many more
Yeah.
pieces, but yeah, we were trying to have a balance of representation for each province and a balance of historic works and contemporary as well. And
And we
so yeah, we could have just keep going on, but
Yeah, and there were so many, there were artists who we just, you know, couldn't include, because I remember William Pankow from Alberta was a late entry that I had to kind of beg for some reason. I didn't come across his work until pretty much the 11th hour. But it's just such interesting and just like perfect folk vernacular art that we did manage to shoehorn one beautiful piece in from the Alberta Foundation for the Arts. But yeah, towards the end, we really had to be quite brutal. Otherwise, I don't know, it would have been a 6,000 square foot exhibition instead of 4.5.
right, right.
But the presentation, Brandon, is wonderful because you have pretty much everything, I think, whereas some of the other presentations Jen had to do quite a bit of editing.
Mm-hmm. No, we were blessed in that respect, but you know, I'm also working with a team that know the space really well. So there's, you know, we haven't had to pull anything, and we certainly, if we're able to return to in-person visits, you know, it's wheelchair accessible, and you know, people can take their time moving around pieces to get a closer look, for instance. So that's, you know, that's still a kind of a high hope on our radar, but otherwise we're going to try to bring as much as we can virtually and through cinematic means, so that people can at least see, you know, at least they can see that their lives are being enriched in some manner during this sheltering period. But on the flip side, I was going to just pose this question to both of you. Now that we're going through an unprecedented time, you know, people are investigating the arts potentially as a means of relief, a means of helping them focus positively. And out of all this, I suspect that we're going to have a bloom of folk art, or a bloom of vernacular art, I should say. And I just wondered, you know, will it be, do we have to wait another 20 years to see what the results of that are, or do you think this could be revisited in a different context, let's say? So let's have a tall order.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. It'd be interesting to see what comes out of this period of isolation. You know, if it's encouraged people to make work, to be creative, and perhaps people who, you know, who are untrained, just to take up making images or things. It'll be interesting to see what results from this period.
Yeah. I've heard some artists say that, well, maybe there's not a huge difference. I go to my studio, I work alone. I was in contact with Jude Griebel, for instance, who splits his time between Sundre, Alberta, and New York, and he's embarked on a residency right now in New York, and is making a large installation piece. He has 3 exhibitions in Alberta, and I think Saskatchewan later this year. So I think it's proven a time for contemporary artists to be able to focus really well, and examine, I guess, their own priorities and really delve into what's important to them right now. But maybe because people are more limited in where they can travel, they will focus more on vernacular issues, just out of necessity of what's around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's, that's, I guess, a wait and see kind of proposition. But I, my imagination goes in the direction that we might see things flourishing that, that are, somebody takes up woodworking and starts producing things that ordinarily just are responding their own responses to their immediate environment. And in the eyes of someone else, this might be something that's gallery worthy, or just is something that could be shared creatively, in other means, let's say. So,
and Deirdre, I think you're onto something, because many of the folk vernacular artists actually started making work when they, for instance, were recovering from tuberculosis. Well, not recovering, I should say, suffering from tuberculosis, like William Pankow, or retired. I think, Jen, quite a few of the Saskatchewan sculpture-based folk artists had retired from farming or ranching, and took up making whirligigs and models of things, right?
Right. Or it'd be something that they would do during the winter. Like if they were farming, it would be something they would do in the winter. Yeah.
So I think you're onto something, Deirdre.
Yeah.
I have to, groom my my future curator for her own sort of reaction or sort of response to Prairie Vernacular. So, but again, I'd like to thank you very, very much. I know that we still have quite a bit of time, and we've encouraged people to ask questions on Facebook. I've seen a few comments, and largely people expressing it's almost like being at the gallery. Thank you, ladies. This is fantastic, from Shauna Lee. And well, you're very welcome, Shauna. And I don't...
Oh, and thank you, Margaret Basai offered Don Proche when I was struggling with his name. So thank you, Margaret.
Don, yes, that's right. And how would you describe Prairie Gothic? Is a question from Melanie Barnett.
I'll feel that one, Jen.
Okay, so yeah, Prairie Gothic is it's sort of, well, it's considered a contemporary art genre now, but of course you saw it in or we saw it in some vernacular folk artworks, and it's where the artists are addressing sort of darker narratives, maybe history, prairie history that deals with trauma. So Heather Benning's work being an example where she's addressing the loss of the family farm in her film The Dollhouse, and when we were consulting with Dr. Carmen Robertson about how to contextualize some of the Indigenous work, like she was saying, like pieces like Alan Benjamin Clark's paintings of basically his memories of residential school system would go under would be considered like an Indigenous Prairie Gothic, and just dealing with issues of colonial history and racism, that sort of thing. So they're like Frank Sikansky, we've mentioned him, doing paintings of the Depression years with images of fields being overtaken by grasshoppers and people abandoning their farms. And then there's George Tosick from Alberta, where he also has images from images of dust clouds on the prairie, as well as addressing racism in small town.
Yeah. And
I was just going to say, I don't see any more, just, a couple of shout outs, and looks pretty good. Some friendly smiles and icons from Lucy, who's watching.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, Lucy brought up last night how she's interested in mythology, and I thought, and she was like glad that this was one of the first exhibitions that she was going to be working with in Brandon. And so, yeah, I loved the fact that she brought that up, because of course there is a lot of that in the exhibition, for sure. Like thinking of Emily Atkins' video. Yeah,
And
she's definitely dealing with mythology there.
yeah.
Mhm.
And Johann Maka, Dmitri Stryak, yeah, sort of edging into the surrealism and fantasy element of the exhibition, which is really quite intriguing. So, yeah.
And Lucy brought up Chris Reed's Baba Yaga
Yeah.
house. So yeah, there's some great great storytelling throughout the show.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I can't, I feel selfish in a way. I have this beautiful exhibition here, with staff, and we can, you know, it's sort of like we can, like you say, make up imaginary conversations. And, you know, in the video that we showed last night at the opening reception, I got a good chuckle out of the way that some of the three-dimensional pieces seem to be supervising us. And and I like the idea that they're keeping an eye on us as well. So,
you know, Jen actually had a great installation idea of having some of Joe Fafard's sculptures kind of looking at their subjects, right, Jen?
Yeah, well, there's a great sculpture of William McCarger sitting back in his Muskoka chair, and we placed him so that he was looking at his own work, you know, and then of course had Harvey McGinnis in front of his works as well. So just really wanting to show that, to tell that story about the connections between the folk artists and contemporary artists.
And Joe Fafard's portrait of Jean Chrétien was observing some of the political works of Dmitri Stryak, the portraits of the Queen, and did he
Trudeau?
And Pierre Trudeau, that's right. Yeah. So it gave a lovely animation to the installation, I felt. Yeah.
There's a comment from Shauna Lee that says, could you tell me more about those cool surrealism little human figurines?
Would those be Victor Teed, maybe? Around the mirrors? Around the mirror? Or
it could be.
The carvings. Oh, a man with a big nose in it. Oh, that's Jordan Van Sewell, I think.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Those are Jordan Van Sewell. So yeah, I mentioned Jordan. He's from Winnipeg, and his work is influenced by California funk aesthetic. And yeah, he's got these pieces that were. He's got one that's called Wrecking Ball, and so they've got these really what do you call it? Like they're caricatures of people, big noses, really exaggerated figures. And oh yeah, Margaret Basai said maybe Jude Griebel. So yeah, Jordan Van Sewell. Just to go back to his work, his work is really playful, and again has a range of dealing with people and things of I guess popular culture. Jude Griebel, I'll let you talk about his work, Joanne.
Yeah, if it was Jude Griebel, I think the track made me think of Jordan Van Sewell, his ceramic piece. But Jude has two pieces in the exhibition. One is called Ground Drinker, and it's a quite a large figure. I'd say about 5 feet long, which is an amalgamation of a figure and an oil pump jack. And that kind of brings up two of Jude's major interests, which are the environment and the changing degradation of the environment and the connection of people to that, whether it's causal or whether it's an effect, how we are animated by the environment, affected by it, how we affect it. And it is a humorous figure, as I mentioned earlier. So but it's also very pointed and very poignant. So you could think about it in terms of Prairie Gothic as well. The other sculpture that he has in the exhibition is called Grandmother's House, and it's a small sort of prairie house, much like Heather Benning's house in her video, The Doll House. And I think both of them are looking at the demise of a family farm throughout the prairies, and with some affection and perhaps nostalgia, but also a sense of the impact that it's had on lives, the darkness of that impact. And for Jude, he animates it. The house has sort of a little wig on top, which is actually his grandmother's hair. So you get into a slightly macabre edge there.
Shauna Lee was just making comments about growing up in a farming community family just outside of Minnedosa, Manitoba. And so I just thought of, well, there's also the historic pieces by Fred Moulding of the threshing machine, and Fred is really well known and respected folk artist from Saskatchewan, and he would do like little miniature, basically models, and they basically come across as being very toy-like, but he was trying to basically capture the history of farming. And he tried to basically make them as including all the details that would be on a threshing machine, so that it was a sort of educational as well as informative of that history.
Yeah, and you see throughout folk art, folk vernacular art, the work of Hazel Litzkus or Irene McCogany. Hazel Litzkus in particular, she has a piece in the exhibition called Canning Peaches, and it's a sort of an aerial view of the kitchen with people moving around through the various stages of canning peaches, and it's like a how-to do it. And a lot of the folk artists were very interested in documenting their lives and their practices for others to learn from their grandchildren or generations beyond as the way of life changes.
Elaine Rounds has left a comment saying, while watching and listening, I opened my mail to find a delightful Oriental book with original haiku from a friend near Seattle. People making lots of art during this pandemic, mailing lots to my friends and making handmade books. So that's great. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Handmade
books. A lot of the artists in the exhibition, I think, Jen, you said at the beginning, didn't really necessarily think of themselves as artists, the folk artists, the folk vernacular artists. And so one never knows. One's making a handmade book, and who knows, perhaps later that'll be in an exhibition. One never knows.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm very sorry to have lost. Was it just me that went offline?
Oh, I wanted to mention, I don't think we've mentioned throughout, that we produced a publication in tandem with the exhibition. I happen to have a copy right here, if I can orient this to the camera properly.
Yeah.
Designed by Kelly Hartman from Calgary, which has essays around all the themes in the exhibition, has a wonderful essay by Dr. Carmen Robertson, and an essay by Jen specifically on the Saskatchewan folk and vernacular art. And it's a lovely accompaniment to the exhibition if people are able to get their hands on it. And maybe we'll even have it online. I don't think we do right now, but perhaps we will.
Yeah.
Well, certainly the essays are available on the Moose Jaw, the page for the exhibition, and we do have copies available for purchase through the AGSM's gift shop. Glad that you mentioned it. I forgot to mention it last night because I did get an email this morning from a member artist who is lamenting the fact that they may not be able to see the exhibition in person, but they wanted to purchase the catalog and how they could do that. So thank you, Joanne, for bringing that up. It's a very such a solid it's a solid package. It's a solid exhibition, and this time of year is pretty troublesome because of it being cold, and I'm still relatively new to the prairies, so I had a great fear of cold, and I'm so now that I have my snow pants, I'm invincible. So but there's no snow. So let's see. Somebody was asking if they could see the exhibition online, and Naomi, you'll be able to view the exhibition via videos that are going to be released every week, and starting next week on Tuesday will be one of the I think there's 6 sections or 7 sections, but each week we're releasing a video that's related to the themes of the exhibition. And then along with that, if you are able to join us weekly on Thursdays, we're going to be holding a suite of artist talks. February 4th, Diana Thornycroft is joining us at 2 p.m. And then February 25th, Adrian Stimson is going to be joining us. And then in between that, we're going to be releasing what we call vernacular spotlights. And these are video portraits of artists in the Westman and Brandon community. Many of them teach at the gallery, whose works have a parallel to the works that are in the exhibition. These are not necessarily artists that are trained, but they're self-taught, and they have different modes of expression. And we're in the process of bringing these portraits together, and they'll be released throughout the season of the exhibition. And then we have one family workshop that's scheduled March 11th. It's going to be delightful, and you'll be able to get materials from the gallery. And I'm thinking if I missed anything yet. The Tuesday releases of the videos will occur probably on our Facebook page, and then every Thursday there'll be some other type of activity related to the exhibition. After last night's performance by the young fiddler Caitlin Baker, I felt an urge to invite her back for a longer concert. So when I've been able to clarify with her schedule, she's a full-time student at Brennan University. I'm hoping that she can do a little bit more prolonged concert, because when we were preparing this exhibition, we were trying to seek musical ideas that would fit with the themes of the exhibition. And of course, Brandon University has a very strong music department, and there's quite a number of musicians in the community. So we're trying to pull in some extra links to other types of art forms as well. But anyway, we were just delighted that Caitlin joined us so spontaneously last night as well. So
that's great.
Yeah. So again, if people are still with us after the drop of the internet, we encourage you to come back. You can follow us on Facebook. We're on Instagram and also on Twitter. And of course, you can always look at the Art Gallery's website, agsm.ca, for further information about what's upcoming as well. And I'm just honored and delighted to be with Jen and Joanne this afternoon. And if there's some burning questions that you just didn't have the heart to ask, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll try and get those. We'll try to respond to you as quickly as possible. And any folk artists that are out there watching, or any vernacular artists, I think, just know that we are with you in spirit, and we might be coming for a second part 2 of this. So anyway, it was great seeing you well and happy. Have a pleasant afternoon, everybody. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Deirdre.
Okay,
Take
thanks.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.